You woke many hours later, expecting it to be mid-morning from how rested you felt. Only when you peeped an eye towards the curtains, you noticed it was still dark outside. Feeling your muscles aching from lying down for too long, you decided to get up. You had fallen asleep in your dressing gown, so after a quick shower, you changed into a comfortable pair of fleece pants and a loose top. The inside of the cabin was strangely warm for being partway up a snowy mountain. You had to wonder if it was Axel's doing. He had rigged the cabin to keep Heartless out, so perhaps he had also found a way to keep the heat in. Wondering if Axel was awake, as he was normally a fairly early riser, you peeped open the bedroom door. The room outside was dark with the curtains closed. Listening for sounds, you heard the steady, deep breathing from the couch. At first, you thought it was better to let him sleep. Only, you decided shyly, that it might be nice to see Axel's face without all that sarcasm, without all the joking, without him catching you staring. You shuffled round until you were in front of the sofa, then sat down on the low granite coffee table for a perch. You had to put your knuckles to your mouth to halt the snort of laughter when you looked at him. Sleeping Beauty or what? As his legs were too long for the couch, one dangled over the side and the other was bent upwards against the back cushions. It didn't look the least bit comfortable. One arm was covering his face, and the other was dangling towards the coffee table, a truly odd angle, like a limp puppet. His hair was in disarray, and the trail of drool from his open mouth was noticeable even in what dim light there was. Yet, strangely, you still thought he was just a little bit endearing, not in spite of his sprawling sleeping form. In fact, you thought it helped. It was almost charming, like you were witnessing the most human side of him. You would never have thought it if Axel was a stranger, but these past few weeks, these past 24 hours, had made you think twice about your predisposition of hating any and all human connections. You don't know what made you do it, but you reached for Axel's hand. The thought that he could wake up didn't occur to you. For all intents and purposes, he seemed dead to the world. He had kept his gloves on, but you didn't mind to touch his skin. You just wanted to touch him, like he did so freely with you. You slipped your hand into his, lolling off the side of the couch, and held it. You applauded yourself internally for doing it. Then you dared to look at his face. He really was something. Nothing like the nightmarish figures of your past, those who had caused you to shut off your heart and refuse all attempts at bonding with you. You had spent so long hating everyone, you weren't sure you knew how to let your guard down anymore. But something about Axel made you want to try. Part of you was still scared that he would turn out to be just like everyone else, but he was already challenging your preconceptions. You still felt guilty for calling him such terrible things back in the mountains, after he had shown you such a beautiful place, and after he had found you somewhere to live away from the world that never was. That was your fault, not his. You couldn't believe anyone would do something nice without expecting something in return. As the guilt weighed in on you, you decided to try and make it up to him. Letting go of Axel's hand, you left him in favour of going into the kitchen. Axel had told you he had bought food for you while you stayed here. The least you could do was make him breakfast. Though your intentions were good, one crucial factor was missing from your plan. You couldn't cook. Axel woke to the sound of a fire alarm blaring from the kitchen and the sound of your panicked yelping. He got up from the couch, barely conscious, and wandered through to see what kind of danger you had put yourself in this time. There you were, brandishing a towel like a shield as you advanced towards an on-fire frying pan. If there was food in the pan, it had already turned to charcoal. You didn't look like you knew what you were doing with the towel, squinting and flinching as you held it closer and closer to the flames. A star for effort, D for cooking skills and fire safety.
Step back.
Axel woke himself up properly so he could tend to your mess. You squeaked when you saw him, feeling embarrassed for causing such chaos, but a little happy that you no longer had to deal with the mess on your own. When he was next to you, he held out his hand. Obediently, you gave him the towel. Realizing that it wasn't wet, he passed you a disbelieving stare, like he was surprised you had made it this far in life without dying yet, then rinsed the towel under the tap before throwing it over the flames. They disappeared in an instant. You hung your head when he looked at you. You expected him to say something sarcastic or insulting, and really, when you had been trying to make him an apology breakfast, that was the last thing you wanted to hear. What you didn't expect was the soft, babying tone of his voice when he said,
"Did you hurt yourself?"
The shock of his words and the way he said them made you jolt your gaze from the floor to look at him. Your face turned unexpectedly red as nervous, happy shivers rippled through you. What was worse, you had no idea why. He wasn't being sarcastic. You could see that just from looking at him. He seemed concerned, but the coddling way he said it and the warm, stern way he was staring at you made you a bit tingly. You couldn't force the words out. Somewhere along the line during your battle with the pan, you had scalded yourself with hot cooking oil. Not seriously. It had spat and speckled your wrist with hot grease, but you hadn't wanted to make a fuss about it. The patches of skin looked like little red freckles.
Let me see.
Axel lifted a hand towards you, waiting for you to show him what was wrong. Your heart thumped heavily in your chest. This was Axel. Was this Axel? Had he always spoken like that? Had he always sounded so caring and strong? Your body rippled with tingles again. You hadn't wanted to make a fuss about your hand, but suddenly you found yourself wanting to show him, and for him to make a fuss about it, and for him to tell you to be more careful, with that same look on his face, like you were precious to him, like your safety was his greatest concern. To your delight, when you showed him your arm, he did make a fuss. He took off his gloves, which you had never seen him do, and took you over to the sink, holding your wrist under the cold water as he rubbed gentle circles on your skin to wipe away the oil. You couldn't look at him as he did it. You couldn't bear for him to see your blush. You had no idea why you were enjoying this so much. After quite some time, he turned off the tap and dabbed your wrist with a towel to dry it. You tried to keep your gaze averted, but you were enjoying his mollycoddling too much. "Axel, you began, finally meeting his gaze. His expression was caught somewhere between his usual playful, relaxed look and careful adoration. A single second. That was how long you managed to hold his gaze before your insides went wobbly and you had to look away. He chuckled, and damn it, that only made you feel wobblier. You didn't know it consciously, but the light in your heart was forming bigger and bigger cracks in its dark outer barrier. After Axel helped you clean up the mess, saying he would find simpler food for you to cook before he left, although he was having doubts about leaving you now that he knew you could only manage microwave food and raw vegetables, you felt far better than you had done in, well, years. Leaving Axel to throw the frying pan away, you slipped out through the back of the cabin onto the decking area. You needed a little time away from him. Your thoughts were becoming too muddled. The sun had just started to rise. You stared, squinting into the near darkness at the view. The front side of the cabin faced the woods, with trees as far as the eye could see, but this side seemed to have a different view. You were near the edge of the mountain here, and through the murky darkness you could see the horizon, with valleys and miles upon miles of wilderness. Staring off into the distance, a sound suddenly registered in your ears. Somewhere close by, you could hear a gentle humming sound. Looking around, you couldn't spot the source at first. You shuffled across the decking, hopping from barefoot to barefoot as the frost tickled your toes. You followed the decking around to the side of the cabin, then finally spotted the hot tub. It was covered by a thick thermal insulator, humming to tell you it was ready for use. If you really intended to stay here, particularly in the winter months, a hot tub seemed like such a perfect idea. Your very own escape from reality, from Heartless and those god-awful dusks, from people, from the world. You really weren't that much of a people person. For all intents and purposes, you classed yourself as an introvert. The cabin seemed like such a wonderful place, and it was thanks to Axel you had it. You felt like such an arse for how you had reacted, hearing the cabin had a hot tub. It only showed how little you trusted anyone. Your first thought had been that Axel used this cabin to pick up women, that suddenly you were one of many. It only occurred to you now that perhaps your anger had also come from a kind of jealousy. When on earth had you started to see Axel that way? You weren't supposed to care at all how many conquests someone had. The idea of romance or anything close sounded downright hideous to you. Yet, finding out that the cabin was yours and yours alone relieved you. Axel had created a one-of-a-kind safe space for you to relax, somewhere you had never had before in your entire life, and it came with a freaking hot tub. Your giddiness took over you before you could stop it. You dashed back inside the cabin, riding on the waves of your happiness, and asked Axel where he had put your new clothes. Enjoying your enthusiasm, he pointed you in the direction of your bedroom wardrobes, then asked what you were up to. You told him it didn't matter, fearing you would bottle it if you asked too early. You waited until you had swapped out of your comfortable clothes, choosing between the assortments of swimwear Axel had bought, ranging from bikinis to modest one-pieces. You chose a tankini in the end, a two-piece that covered your stomach. Then once you were changed, you threw on your indulgingly comfortable dressing gown, then returned to where Axel was. He noticed the glint in your eyes.
What?
You didn't give yourself time to doubt. Maybe it was okay to ask. Maybe it was okay to feel safe. Maybe now was the right time for your life to really begin. I was thinking, since it's nearly sunrise, and since you said you can't stay here, maybe you might want to. I mean, if you want to. It was strange how the words could get so easily jumbled up in your head. I'm not saying you have to, but if you want, then maybe we could watch the sunrise from the hot tub? The harsh sound of a dish shattering as Axel dropped it was totally eclipsed by the expression on his face. At first, he looked shocked in a way no man had been shocked before. Then, quicker than a flash, his eyes, his lips, his distractingly handsome face rose into a smile, like he had just won an award. And so, from the warm waters of the hot tub, the two of you watched the morning break. You sat with your elbows over the side of the tub, staring out into the vast landscape of the mountains. Axel stayed back, resting comfortably with his arms splayed out, enjoying the jets as they massaged his naked back muscles. It was so peaceful. You were right, too. On this side of the cabin, the view stretched for miles. It was a landscape of valleys, frozen streams, fir trees, and far off in the distance was the ocean, with the sun rising above it. And it was something else. "Hey Axel," you said after a while. It caught his attention. He loved when you said his name.
Yeah?
You didn't say anything more. Axel took it as an invitation, wading over to your side of the hot tub. You didn't look back at him, choosing to stare ahead into the morning. He came up alongside you, peering forward to catch your eye. It took all your effort not to meet his gaze. You were nervous now that he was next to you. They weren't the nerves that came with worry. They felt a lot more like butterflies. Axel waited a while longer for you to speak, or to look at him, but you didn't. He smiled, but stayed quiet. He looked out at the view with you, embracing the heat of the sun on his face as the cool morning breeze tickled any part of him above water. He wondered how much effort it was taking you to have him this close. It was probably much harder than normal, considering he was in nothing but a pair of swim shorts. But you seemed content, despite that you were obviously avoiding his gaze. He moved towards you slowly, so slowly, to give you chance to move away, to tell him to back off. But you didn't. You stayed still, staring off into the sunrise. You started to smile gently as he closed the final distance. His arms wrapped around you like a blanket, a warm embrace that was almost too afraid to break you. For some reason, you let out a sigh, like you had been holding your breath, too scared to dare to hope he would come to you. His hold stayed gentle, pulling you into him, his face a breadth away from yours. You looked out into the world, trusting Axel's actions, enjoying the long-lost feeling of protective arms around you. He held you slightly tighter, and you brought a hand up to touch his arm, to tell him it was all right. Your action was enough for him. He too let out a little sigh of relief. He was so close to you. All he had to do was tilt your face and he could kiss you. In this moment, God, he wanted to. You were so beautiful. He could feel your heart alive in a way he hadn't felt before. This was more than light. He wanted to stroke your hair and tell you that you made him feel human, that when he was with you, he was a somebody with a heart. Instead of giving in to his urge, he pushed his forehead into the side of your face, squeezing you in his arms. For now, it was enough. You needed to know you could trust him. You needed to know he would respect your boundaries. He knew he had to wait. But you were worth that wait. And if he could have more moments like this, away from the organization, away from duties, spending time with you in peace, then he was happy to wait. It was such a beautiful morning. Neither of you could think of a morning that had been better.